Hi, welcome back to the channel. It's been a bit of a while since I've uploaded. I've been busy doing a few other things, but I thought maybe it's time I come on and do a video. If you're new to the channel, check out the video I did last, which was Lux Maxing Part 2. It's quite a good video. First of all, the agency that I applied to got back to me last week, and they said they'll be replying to me in the next 2 weeks, and then hopefully, fingers crossed, that's when the ball should really start rolling. I will say to anybody who is interested in going into modelling, who isn't doing it as yet, it is a long drawn out waiting process that you kind of have to go through when you're applying to agencies. So you have to kind of be comfortable with waiting, with the waiting process, how long it might take for somebody to get back to you. So you have to bear that in mind if you are thinking about doing it. Because I remember when I started this channel, it was also for people who may be interested in going into modelling, who may be thinking about it. It is something you have to bear in mind, that the process can drag on, or it can feel like that. In reality, it isn't such a long span of time, but it feels longer than it actually is. So if you are interested in doing it, you have to bear in mind it can take a while. And there are times, certainly even in my case, where it can, you can get a bit disheartened, and you can get a bit. It's not so much it brings you down, but there are times it kind of chips away at you a bit. You're a bit like, oh, you feel like that. Even though you are going somewhere, even though you are starting something, it can sometimes feel like you're stuck in neutral, if you know what I mean. It feels like you're working your way to something, but sometimes it feels like it's just taking a while to get there. In my case, anyway, but I'm sure many people who go into this arena would say the same sort of thing. So if you are interested in doing it, you have to bear that in mind, that it is a process that you will be waiting, and it's very uncertain. There's no clear, that they let you know when they let you know. It's very uncertain. You don't have a lot of control. I'm not trying to talk anybody out of it who is thinking about doing it, but at the same time, these are things you should bear in mind, that it's all a process, but it is a learning curve. Nevertheless, it does teach you discipline, and it also you kind of see how good you are with how you cope with this process of sending out to agencies. And you find, I should imagine it's different for everybody. I should imagine. So it might be different for you if you're thinking about doing it. It might be a different process. But fingers crossed, within the next 2 weeks, should hear something. So let's wait and see what happens. But I wanted to just mention what's happening with that. But the other thing I wanted to talk about in this video is about how you look, and how fashion is a very big thing, in that people judge you very quickly on how you look. I did a video recently talking about alternative fashions, and how I consider how I look to be kind of an alternative fashion, having long hair. Because it's not the norm for guys to have long hair, so to a degree I consider this an alternative fashion. I mean, it's not alternative compared to some alternative fashions, but I think it's still on that under that umbrella of alternative fashions. And how just looking slightly different from the majority, from most people, can kind of... It doesn't take a lot, is what I'm saying, to be singled out in some ways. Now, I don't know what your fashion is, how you look. You may like to blend in and look like everybody else, which there's no right or wrong. But if you are an alternative fashion, or you look slightly different to the majority, how at times it can feel a bit like a struggle. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is, when you look the same as everybody else, when you dress the same, when your hair's the same as everybody else, you're not really noticed in the same way, and you just kind of blend in, and you don't really think about it until you look a bit different, if you know what I mean. It's almost like a transition in a way. You go from, I used to dress the same as many of my peers. I had my hair like all my peers. And so you don't really think about it as much until you kind of get out the box a bit and step outside the box. You realise how people's perceptions of you really do change based on just how you look. And it can be a good and a bad thing. I remember saying quite a while ago in a recent video, I was going to do a video about how your look can be a negative and positive thing, about how people perceive you. So I thought now would be the time to do it. When I, for example, go out, I know that there's a good chance that somebody, somewhere, is likely to say something or shout something or have a slight dig or whatever at how you look. And I've had long hair for a couple of years now, so you kind of used to it and you expect it. But at the same time, there are still times where I will tie my hair up or I'll put my hood up so that I can just get from A to B, and I don't really have to worry so much about the reception I'll get when I go outside. So I do have to make a conscious decision every time I go out of the house. Now, you may know what I'm talking about if you're in the same boat, if you look a bit different, if you look slightly different to most people, you'll know what I'm saying. That you approach it from two different ways. One side of the coin, you kind of embrace it and you kind of accept it and you almost encourage it to a degree. And the other one is sometimes it can affect you negatively and it can get you down. So there's two ways. I'm more or less in the first camp. I kind of accept it, and in a way I sometimes find it quite amusing, the reactions some people, the way some people react. There's countless, if I was to go through how many, the different scenarios of when people have encountered me with beer or not, the amount of times people have literally, they look at you sometimes like you've got two heads. And like I say, if you look a bit differently and you're watching this, you'll know what I'm saying. And like I said, there's two ways that you kind of approach it. Sometimes some people encourage it and they accept it and they embrace it. Other people, it kind of gets them down. I've been in both situations. I tend to lean more to the okay, I'll just accept it. But there are times when you have to really think should I tie my hair up or put my hood up or whatever. Because I suppose sometimes you kind of feel like you're almost like in a sideshow. You kind of feel like you don't mind being single out every now and then, and in part you quite like the attention to a degree, or you certainly get used to it, so that you kind of learn how to handle it. So there's two ways to handle it. But again, there are times you do feel like you have to kind of cover up or hide away a bit. And it's just how alternative fashions are kind of treated. That we, for example, where I live, I often say, we might as well still be in the 1950s. Even though we're well into the 2020s, we might as well still be in the 1950s, because the perception many people have is that it's hard for some people to understand. Even though it's literally just having long hair, and I dress slightly differently to many of the other people around here, but I'll get to that in a moment. Now again, you may be watching this and you may not know what I'm talking about. You may look like everybody else. You may not be a part of an alternative fashion at all, and you might look the same as everybody else. And it's harder to understand if that's the case, until you yourself start experimenting differently with how you look, or wearing different clothes, or whatever that is. Then you start to kind of say, you don't feel persecuted or anything, but you do feel, you certainly know that you're singled out and you are noticed a lot more. And like I said, I dress differently compared to most people where I live, and I'll give you an example of how the contrast that you can experience. A few days ago, I decided to dress completely differently to how I usually dress, and dress more like the people in the area that I live. So I decided to wear jogging bottoms, my big jacket, I had a woolly hat on, and my hood up. And because, that's kind of the that dress wear for jogging bottoms, tracksuits, trains is very much kind of the rule of the day in the area that I live. So I decided to dress like that, and I went out, and the contrast from how I'm normally perceived to how I was perceived when I dressed like with the tracksuit and the jogging bottoms and the woolly hat and all the rest of it. Literally, it was such a contradiction. The contrast was so wide and so far apart that it was almost like having an invisibility cloak on in some ways. Not one person looked at me, said anything, did a double take. Not one person. Now, compared to when I usually go out, for every person who doesn't notice me or make a fuss or say anything there'll be somebody who does. Who sometimes you can have numerous in one day. You can have numerous different occasions where somebody will say something or look at you or whatever. But when I dressed like everybody else for the day, not one person looked at me, or even I might as well not been there. And it was just so strange to realise that really all life is, after all, is hairdos and what you dress. And what a big part that is about your personality or your character is your look, and how it says an awful lot about you, and how it kind of defines you in many ways is kind of the point that's kind of the point I'm trying to make with this video, is how much your look it does play a massive part in how people perceive you, particularly with first impressions more than anything. Obviously, if many of my friends or family don't really comment on my hair because they've seen it with me now for that long, it doesn't really come up in conversation. But for people who have only recently met you or people who just see you, it does play a massive part. And when you look slightly different from the rest, not in a big way, but just slightly different. And as I said, alternative fashions is a wide umbrella. You know, all the way from what I consider how I look to much more, much more extreme alternative fashions, which are great. But it's a wide spectrum, and we kind of we don't, even though we're in the 2020s, in some circles it still might as well be the 1950s, in that it's much harder for some people to accept how you look than others, and particularly when you live in certain areas. When I venture away from my hometown, people don't really, when I go to the cities and things like that, people don't really pay as much attention. But in these suburban areas, people pay much more attention. And the contrast of dressing slightly differently to dressing like everybody else is absolutely massive. It's a massive game changer, in that you just look like the rest, so no one takes any notice, nobody assumes anything differently, because you just fit in. But when you look differently in any way, you are straight away, it's almost like a spotlight shining on you. And again, it's not always negative. It's not always a negative reception. Often it's very positive responses, and you get compliments and all these kind of things. Some people admire it about you, is what I'm saying. Some people admire when you dress a bit differently, or you look a bit differently, and they admire that you've kind of gone against the grain, if you know what I'm saying. So that's another, if you to flip it, that's another side to the coin, that it can also lead to positive responses as well as negative. But negative responses do happen, and do happen quite frequently. And again, if you are watching this and you do dress differently, and you are part of an alternative fashion, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. That people will look at you differently, and they will kind of prejudge you in some sense. And like I said, there's two ways you can kind of deal with it. You can either accept it and just think, right, well, I'm going to do it regardless, or you can let it get you down. And depending on the day, depending on how you're feeling, sometimes you think, sod it, I'm going to just, I'm just going to, do it regardless. Or sometimes you think, well, I've got to cover up today because I don't really want the hassle. But you do have to make that conscious decision. And that's one thing I've learned with having long hair, is that you do sort of have to make that conscious decision. Am I going to accept the adversity, or am I going to cover up? And that is the decision you have to make. Now, like I say, you may not experience that because you may look like everybody else. But if you do, or are thinking about wanting to change how you look a bit, but you're a bit worried that people might ridicule you a bit, or might look at you a bit differently, well, you should do it for yourself. You shouldn't really let other people's opinions get to you that much. But it's an interesting thing to know. It's an interesting thing to think about, and to acknowledge that how your look does determine how people prejudge you in many ways. It's something that some people will compliment, but it is something people will criticise as well. It'll be like one of the first things if you're, it'll be the first thing they'll use to kind of belittle you or bring you down. And that's what I wanted to talk about in this video, and it's all about how you handle it, really. And like I say, if you are also already going through looking a bit differently from everybody else, just think to yourself, how do you handle it? Do you have to make that decision every time you go out? Do you think to yourself, oh, should I just dress a bit like everyone else today so I don't have to kind of cope the criticism or the backlash, if you like? Or do you think, sod it, I'm just gonna be proud about it, whatever. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just how do you handle it? Just have a little think to yourself. Do you have to make that decision before you go out? Like I say, 9 times out of 10, I'm in the camp of sod it. This is how I look. I like how I look. It doesn't really matter too much what other people think. But every now and then there's the odd day where I think, now I'm going to dress down a bit and try and fit in a bit more, just so I don't have to put up with the hassle of people looking, and you know what I mean. But it was interesting to see how just something as simple as how you dress kind of, it's how much you'll notice depending on how you dress in a way. And it was very interesting to see just the difference in how people react to you depending on what your hair's like or what clothes you've got on, But that's what I wanted to do this video on. Like I said, you shouldn't be worried to try out different things. You shouldn't worry too much about what other people think. Yes, we all worry to a degree, but you shouldn't let it overtake you. You shouldn't let it be your main concern. So, where are you in this? Are you in the alternative realm? Or are you still in the quite mainstream realm? Or whatever, we'll call it the mainstream realm. Where everyone kind of, there's like a certain dress code. In certain areas. Because like I said, where I live, there's definitely a dress code. It's almost like a bit of a uniform mentality. But again, it's just personal preference, and that's what I wanted to do this video on. As I say again, if you're new to the channel, check out all the videos previous to this. The last video I did was Lux Maxing Part 2. If you want, leave a like. If you want, leave a comment. It's up to you. I don't know when I'll be uploading again. Hopefully within the next week. I'll try to make it a bit more regular. I know it's been a bit of a while since I last uploaded, but I'll try and make it a bit more regular. Hopefully in the next video I'll be able to give you more info on what's happening with the agency. Fingers crossed in the next couple of coming weeks things take off. So hopefully I'll be able to mention that in a video. But as far from that, I think we'll wrap it up there. So thanks to anybody who watches, thanks to anybody who watched the previous videos, and I will catch you in the next video. Don't know what it's going to be about yet, but we'll have to see. So, peace. Off.